So welcome everyone, and let's bow in. Again, welcome to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course. We are working our way through the profound treasury of the ocean of Dharma, which is a 3-volume set, a digest of the talks that Trungpa Rinpoche gave over the course of, I think, 15 years, with actually 13 different seminaries, 3-month programs that took place in the fall of each year, when he took away 150 to 250 students for a retreat, practice, and study. And these talks were given in the evenings by him, if not in the early morning hours in some of the cases. And they comprised the teachings of the Hinayana stage of the path, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. And we are on the 2nd volume of these digested talks, the Mahayana, chapter 34, dealing with aggression. And tonight, Laura Reed is going to be teaching. So Laura, take it away.
Our lineage is primarily a path of practice in addition to understanding. Understanding our Buddha nature as our true default and that ordinary states of mind can be transformed into it can create feelings of gratification or inspiration. However, there might also arise uncertainty as to how do we actually act on this understanding. This uncertainty or not knowing is what encourages us to, quote, seek further discipline on the Bodhisattva path. The bewilderment becomes the support encouraging discipline and further practice, encouraging us to travel an experiential path, not just a conceptual one. Similarly, we know conceptually that when we take the Bodhisattva vow, we're committing ourselves to the benefit of all sentient beings. But again, how do we actually do that? The starting point's not directly trying to be kind and compassionate to all, nor do we start with meditating on emptiness. We also begin with training the mind, or Lojong. And the starting point at Lojong is to cultivate the absence of aggression. We cultivate the absence of aggression not by attempting to suppress it, but we start by beginning to become familiar with it, by training our minds to become aware of it. Our basic ground is an openness to seeing ourselves, an openness to see, to feel when we're caught in the grips of our aggression. We have a willingness to see when our self-centeredness and self-deception arise. In this way, we can become our own teacher along with our spiritual friend. So while in the Hinayana, our primary focus was on letting go of clinging, a focus on non-passion. With the Mahayana, our focus moves to cultivating of non-aggression. Trungpa describes 3 types of aggressions that we can become familiar with. First, there is the deep-rooted aggression. It has the quality of background. If there's a little scraping of surface gentility, the deep-rooted aggression is right there, an underlining unhappiness, like always being hungry for something else to happen, something other than what's arising right now. Trungpa Rinpoche calls this basic negativity. We're negative about the present moment. The second kind of aggression is sort of an analytical aggression. We use our minds to develop the best case for ourselves. Why our perspective, story, narrative is objective truth. Why our way of seeing our interactions with others is the most valid and reasonable way to see it. Trungpa Rinpoche says that when we reshape our opponent, our friend, or our environment so that it supports our viewpoint, we're using analytical aggression and we're creating more aggression while reinforcing what we originally had. So we have a situation we don't like, and then we build a further argument against it. Trungpa calls this kind of aggression negative negativity. There's negativity, and then we build more negativity on top of it. The third type of aggression, Trungpa Rinpoche describes as a sudden wind of aggression. It comes upon you almost as if out of nowhere, out of open air. And when it hits you, you feel it all at once, encompassing your body. There isn't an obvious trigger or reason, but suddenly you are a ball of cast iron, dead set in your point of view. Then you may quickly find a reason, using analytical aggression, as to why you're being made a victim of others or of your environment. The sudden wind of aggression makes use of the two other types, moving back and forth, pulling from the deep-rooted aggression and fueling it with analytical argument. All three kinds of aggression are based on a lack of generosity. In the midst of an argument or some other sort of aggression, we are in the opposite mindset of giving or compassion. This lack of generosity can be seen, for example, in analytical aggression, when we interpret others' behavior in the worst possible light, or at least nowhere as kindly and generously as we see our own motives and actions. We drop all the sense of rightness, of validity in the situation, and we assign it to ourselves. There is a quality of shifting and movement with aggression. We welcome movement. We want to take action. We want to fight or push against or push away, get rid of, shift what is here. But all this movement disturbs our clarity in seeing what is really here. Trungpa Rinpoche says, quote, "It's like the analogy of the moon reflecting a moving water. The water is disturbed. So when the moon shines on it, the picture of the moon is broken up into fragmented patterns. You do see some fragments of the moon, but you have no clear and undistorted picture of the moon as a whole." As we're beginning to become familiar with our own aggression, we see that it doesn't always manifest as anger or frustration or self-righteousness. We begin to pick up the subtle aggression of self-improvement, or of the guilt that says we're never doing enough. Here, aggression is something we're turning inward, attacking ourselves for what we should or shouldn't be doing. Or maybe our aggression shows itself as the fear of losing ground. We become tough and rigid to protect our territory. Aggression, Trungpa Rinpoche says, covers a lot. When we manifest aggression, however we manifest it, we're creating a hell realm to live in. We can do this anywhere, in the middle of a cold winter or in a tropical paradise. At this stage in the development of ourselves as a bodhisattva, we've not yet transcended the hell realm or any of the others. However, we are beginning to loosen up the solidity of the realm we're creating for ourselves. This loosening up introduces the possibility of things being different than our current aggressive viewpoint sees them as. A discovery of the potential of Buddha nature starts to undermine the hold of the realms. That is, as long as we don't use our discovery as a prop to our ego, which would be just re-sowing the seeds of whatever realm we're in. With Lojong practice, you're beginning to deliberately train your mind toward non-aggression. Generally, deliberate practice and compassion is like the last thing we want to do when we're inflamed or captured by our aggression. And it's really tough to do it then. When we're in the midst of our aggression, we feel tremendous resistance and resentment of shifting away from our firm grip of rightness. However, Trungpa Rinpoche says it is particularly at such times that the Bodhisattva path begins to dawn on you. These times are highly opportune moments to practice the Bodhisattva type of awareness of breathing. The Bodhisattva type of awareness of breathing is like Shamatha Vipassana, except you add to your awareness of the out-breath the mental exercise of giving away what is desirable. And on the in-breath, you mentally take in anything you're trying to avoid. Out-breath, giving away the good. In-breath, taking in the bad. It's very basic and not conceptual. This and other mindfulness of breath practices in Lojong give us the opportunity to recognize and let go of the tenseness of aggression as part of our sitting practice. Rather than suppressing it, we're learning to recognize what aggression feels like in our bodies. We can then own our own aggression and move into authenticity. This breathing in what you don't want and breathing out what you do is somewhat like Vipassana practice in that you have a sense of your whole body. It is a deliberate practice that you apply to situations where you find yourself irritated, frustrated, or guilty. But before starting this practice, it's really important to be grounded in Shamatha and Vipassana. Without this background, Lojong could feel like you're punishing yourself by bringing in the pain and suffering and giving away light or comfort or ease. However, after basic sitting practice in Shamatha and Vipassana, we become cooked in a way that allows us to genuinely practice Lojong. Even with the preparation of basic sitting practice, a grounding in Shamatha and Vipassana, it might seem that to deliberately cultivate compassion is phony or disingenuous. If these kinds of thoughts arise, Trungpa Rinpoche recommends to keep practicing Lojong anyway. The thoughts are just thoughts. If you continue to practice Lojong with your aggression or irritation, you will have an embodied experience to work with. Like the story John told us last week about the great Indian teacher Atisha, who brought his very annoying Bengali tea boy with him to Tibet as fodder for his compassion practice, because he was worried that Tibetan people were too gentle and easygoing. and then found out he needn't bother, that they were annoying enough in their own right. Like Atisha, we generally don't have to seek out annoying people to have the opportunity to practice. As some of us shared last week, most of us have a relative or two who can inspire aggression and passion and attachment aplenty in our daily life. Trungpa Rinpoche says, the path consists in taking advantage of whatever is happening to you at the moment. If you apply compassion practice when you're in a really bad mood, if you sit and do it, you will have a very real experience of it. Rather than reacting in our habitual ways, we're sitting down and breathing in that bad mood, the dark, the claustrophobic, the pain, and breathing out what would benefit the other, breathing out light and ease. And while we might not be able to practice in the moment, we can later bring the felt memory of the situation to work with on the cushion. So our bad moods are becoming grist for the mill of deliberate compassion practice. Rather than pushing away the aggression, we're welcoming it in. After this stage of deliberate training in compassion comes the stage called compassion without deliberate practice. It follows the first stage of deliberate compassion, just like sitting practice is followed by post-meditation. That is, on the cushion, we practice mindfulness of the breath. Off the cushion, awareness comes to us. Trungpa Rinpoche says, first you sit, then you get up and do other things. But the impression of the meditation or the awareness flashes on you. Likewise, the second stage of compassion is unformed, not manufactured. Compassion without deliberate practice. But in the beginning of the path, there is a need for deliberateness and direction. The deliberateness isn't the same as making something a project. There's less self-consciousness to this kind of effort. You aren't so invested in accomplishing something, you're just practicing, you're just doing it. Then as things arise in your life, your practice comes to you. You aren't deliberately setting the agenda. Life sets the agenda. And there's no problem. It's just you working with whatever arises. And that's the path. That's taking refuge in the Dharma, taking refuge in whatever comes. And whatever comes may be things we don't want. With Lojong practice, we are training in being with the undesirable. Perhaps training to be with things that challenge how we see ourselves. Our identification with accomplishments and circumstances that we habitually use to build ourselves up with, those are undermined by Lojong training. Trungpa Rinpoche says there's an insulting quality to the Lojong exercises, an insult to ego. In Lojong, we aren't trying to be the best, the fastest horse in the race. In Lojong, we're embracing being the worst horse. And there's a freedom that comes with that, with embracing being the worst horse. And a lifting of the resentment that we're not winning the race. Now we're not blind and lost in our aggression anymore. With this dropping of resentment, our aggression isn't taken away, but it's lightened and begins to feel workable. We aren't as shut down as before, not so tied inward, incommunicado. There can be some openness, some fluidity in the situation. We aren't saying here that there's a problem with being angry per se. Anger without the resentment, the constriction, the tightness caused by aggression isn't the issue. Now, our focus is on the experience of aggression, how to heighten our awareness of what the aggression is made out of without losing ourselves in it. Trungpa says, with Lojong, you're not giving in to the aggression, but you are accentuating the reality of the aggression. You are being accommodating to the aggression. If you can get used to the aggression, that is a tremendous achievement. A spontaneous loosening comes with deliberate practice, but not all at once. We start where we are in the samsaric world, not as realized enlightened beings. And then the whole process, the path to enlightenment, is gradual. Our practice gradually cooking us. Like frogs in the stew pot, gradually adding warmer and warmer water. The heat increases so gradually, we aren't usually aware day to day that something has changed in our way of being. We begin to stay in the stew pot of awareness instead of jumping out of the present moment. Trungpa Rinpoche gives an example, probably a better one than that, where he says it's like starting to exercise. We may feel stiff and pain after we first start exercising more, but gradually we loosen up and become stronger. With Lojong practice, he says, you are training to loosen up your psychological body, to loosen that very stiff aggression through the practice. This loosening comes when we do the practice, not because of analytical or scholarly effort. We aren't asked to understand how the Lojong slogans work. We aren't asked to make a judgment on sophistication or face validity of the practices. We're asked to just do them. Then the practices allow us to have certain experiences that result in the loosening of our tightness, the loosening of the resentment, and the contraction of aggression. So on the surface, some of these slogans may look kind of simple-minded, like love one another and be humble, but there's a lot more to them than that. Lojong training is a really brave practice. Not because we're giving away to others what we would like to keep for ourselves, but that we're willing to experience our resistance to that. We're willing to be with the struggle ego makes to put our interests, our own self-survival first. Letting go of all of that can feel like annihilation to the ego. Facing that fear and being with the embodiment of it and letting go is really brave. And then in a way that seems completely illogical to the ego, with the Mahayana and Lojong, aggression lightens. We aren't swimming in a sea of self-protection. There's a sudden glimpse of an alternative. Trungpa says, our aggression is cleared out, like we were living in a stuffy, restricted room, and now there's fresh air and spaciousness. And a result that seems completely illogical to the ego from a dualistic perspective is completely natural, threefold purity from a non-dualistic view. It doesn't matter who's getting what, who's giving, what is being done, when there's no distinction between actor, action, and receiver. With this perspective, there's an automatic letting go. There's no you to hold on to your self-interest. There's no other to aggressively push away, to get rid of. The realization comes, Trungpa Rinpoche says that, quote, aggression has no root. It's a phantom. When you, your actions, and the object of your actions have become open, almost non-existent, the second type of compassion, non-deliberate compassion, begins to develop. And now we know we're actually on the path as the second stage of compassion. Compassion without deliberate practice begins to unfold. And it's just beginning to unfold, though. Trungpa Rinpoche says it's infant compassion on the level of trying to crawl. Mostly, we're relating to our Lojong practice as practices that result in our feeling better. We're not yet truly acting out of compassion for others. However, gradually, as we build compassion, the distorted reflection of the moon is settling down, and we begin to see clearly without fragmentation and distortion. Moon on water.
Thank you, Laura. I have very little to add. That was excellent. I really just want to encourage everyone that what we're moving into now with the Lojong teachings are about instructions on how to actually actualize the Buddhist teachings in our lives. We've undergone the necessary preparation, which is a fair amount of study, but especially sitting, and the practice of Tonglen, which softens us up, softens our aggression. That aggression is always very painful. It has as its core wanting things to be different than they actually are, and that desire is in itself painful. But through our practice of Shamatha Vipassana, meditation, through our practice of Tonglen to some degree now, maybe even just beginning Tonglen, we've begun to sense, if not feel, the alternative to that fundamental aggression that he speaks of, that fundamental wish that things were different. The alternative is this open space of reality, which is also filled with compassion, at least at the very beginning, in the sense of beginning to let things be what they are, instead of constantly trying to change and manipulate them, which is the act of aggression. And so we've already begun to soften ourselves up, to begin to give up the aggression and come into this present moment with awareness and open-heartedness. These teachings that we're just beginning now, will give us things that we can do to bring that further along, that shift in allegiance from fundamental aggression to this open, clear, intelligent, and compassionate way of being in the world. We're beginning to undermine the solidity of the realms, these neurotic patterns that we inhabit moment to moment and perhaps for longer periods of time, these realms of passion, jealousy, pride, stupidity, and anger. And we're beginning to soften that up just by coming present, and especially by the practice of Lojong, which is described in this chapter, especially the direction that we're given to regard aggression, feelings of aggression that we may have, as opportunities. Normally, when we feel aggressive, say we have an enemy, and when we think of that enemy or when we encounter that enemy, we go into action one way or another. It might just be mental if we're thinking of that person. It might be actually going into action, saying something, doing something, if we're in their presence. And that action that we go into is the attempt to get rid of the aggression, to blow it out, to release it, to cathart it, you might say. And what we're being told here is that these experiences of this aggression, this feeling, and we really, really wish that things were otherwise, that that enemy was different, that that enemy was gone, or whatever it might be. That enemy could be a person, it could be a situation, it could be all kinds of things. And yet, what we're being told here is that that is an opportunity. It's our T-boy, our Tibetan T-boy. Because we can begin to see it, accept it, embrace it, and dissolve it through the practices of Lojong, and begin to shift our allegiance from constantly trying to get rid of aggression to being here with whatever arises in the present, to awareness and compassion for ourselves and for others. So really what we're doing, one way to describe it is, he puts it, that we're moving into authenticity. The authenticity means being here with what is, including the aggression, and beyond. Because if we're inauthentic, what we're constantly engaged in is the attempt to make things different in a way that's going to satisfy our imaginations. So we bring our practice to aggressive situations. Boy, that's something, huh? When you're feeling aggressive towards someone or something, you breathe it in and you send out good. The Tonglen practice. You breathe on the in-breath, you breathe in that dark, hot, furious pain, and you send out light, ease, understanding, kindness. It takes awareness of what's going on in the present moment. Normally we're so reactive, we're caught up. And what this is enjoining us to do is to remember, to come back, to see what's happening, to stop for a second, and then to do this practice. In order to do the practice, you have to stop reacting. So, I'm kind of very excited that we're going to be doing this. This is the introduction. So he says at the end, You're building compassion within yourself. The compassion means accepting things as they are, having some warmth and heart, rather than this anger of trying to get rid of things. So you're building compassion within yourself in order to remove your own pain and aggression, and those go together. So it is more like relief or medicine than acting out of compassion for others, but it leads to clarity and understanding. So we can have a discussion if you'd like.
Philip has something.
So Laura, thank you. That was so well done. And a question for you both, John and Laura. Is there any substantial difference between the Lo Jung practice described in this chapter and Tong Len?
No?
Not that I know.
Me neither.
Okay.
It's just that it gets more and more subtle and refined. We're going to be getting into Lojong in a more subtle and refined way than we have before, I think, with these teachings. It can permeate our lives more than it has as a sort of a standalone practice. I mean, it can really inform the way you relate to others in situations. That when you're encountering, say, a person who antagonizes you, you could practice Lojong on the spot. That would take some mindfulness, wouldn't it?
By the way, that is possible. Try it sometime.
When I was working on this, I researched by getting into fights with my husband, and I noticed that at least in the middle of the argument, I could notice that aggressive energy, and notice my lack of generosity. Oh, it's interesting. It's about being aware, first and foremost.
I have a thing on my desk, which is very much what John said, but it's from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and it takes it a little further. And he says, in fact, the enemy is the necessary condition for practicing patience. Without an enemy's action, there is no possibility for patience or tolerance to arise. Our friends do not ordinarily test us and provide the opportunity to cultivate patience. Only our enemies do this. So, from this standpoint, we can consider our enemy as a great teacher and revere them for giving us this precious opportunity to practice patience.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you, Phil. That's gorgeous. Yeah.
Thank you, Laura. That was illuminating. And I'm just reminded of a slogan, would I rather be right or happy? It's like, oh, it's too simple. I need more practice. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
One of my favorite slogans is don't get angry, get curious.
And if you're already angry, get curious about your anger.
When my daughter was in her 20s, she once told me, you need to consider what you lose every time you win an argument.
I have a question around this notion of curiosity towards the anger. And I have to admit that I'm suffering a little bit from a professional bias of trying to analyze and understand the roots of and the why, right? Which is, I know is not emphasized here or even necessary, presumably. But with anger, you know, I've noticed if I have this hostility, and I found myself having this today, just free floating anxiety against strangers. And then I was thinking about it tonight as we were, you know, going over this chapter. And thank you, by the way, it was a great overview of the whole Lojong practice. But as we were discussing this, I reviewed those incidents where I felt this hostility, you know, kind of targeted towards stranger, and they happened to be a certain gender and certain gait and certain this and that. And then I thought, oh, I have an issue with this, you know, and I sort of made a connection with something that I'm angry about that is a judgment that I've had towards myself. And while I didn't have the wherewithal to breathe in the aggression today, as I was experiencing this tonight, I made a connection. And what it brought me to is, okay, I'm feeling this irritation towards somebody. And now that I understand this pattern, so I'm kind of arguing for the importance of curiosity. I would call it insight, that there's really a judgment about, sometimes about a part, self-hatred, a part of me that I haven't accepted or that I despise somehow, even if not fully consciously. So there's a bit of, as you can tell, a struggle that I have. You know, it sounds really easy to try and let it go, like, you know, breathe it in and let it go without further thought, but I find that hard to implement. And sometimes I guess what I'm saying is a bit of an analysis brings insight and maybe greater compassion towards the self, ultimately, maybe. Anyway, that's all I wanted to share.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I think what's interesting for me is your process, right? Like there was that burst of aggression, which maybe it was the sudden wind of aggression where it wasn't immediately clear to you, you know, what was going on there, what was trigger. And then from this perspective of a little space, when you got curious, then it was a pattern kind of dropped into place, like you recognize something. And I think that's kind of what we're going for here. It's not that we're going to be non-thinking zombies, but the clarity when we're not caught up and lost in the aggression and not wanting to act out the aggression or justify it, you know, like they were scary, they shouldn't have been walking on my side of the street, whatever. But yeah, I don't find those incompatible.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Thanks, Laura. And thanks, Miriam, for the last comment. Yeah, I don't think there's anything contradictory between this training, this, us doing this, and analysis, an analytic thing. And I think I understand what you're saying, from your professional background. Um, I don't think there's anything contradictory at all. And what you were saying, but the analysis is a little bit different than it would be in a traditional psychotherapeutic analysis. But it's what you were saying is interesting, Miriam, because Shanti Deva says in, I think it's in chapter 6, he writes about, talks about um, that our anger is based on our self-image. you know so whatever that self-image is, we're going to project that out through anger. So if we're angry, we're going to see the world as an angry place. If we're insecure, we're going to see you know you know everyone else as the world is an anxious place, and focus, and that leads to anger. Leads to being thrown off balance. So the more secure we are in our self-image, the less angry we have to do. And I loved what you said, Laura, about you did research with your husband, research on this with fighting with your husband. I hope your husband appreciated it. It was purely for research purposes. And it brought up for me that a very difficult part of letting go of anger, or practicing the antidote to anger, which is patience, um, one of them, and is that I think but I think we all tend to think that the object of our anger, we're doing something, we're punishing that person with us being angry at them, and we don't want to let go of the anger because we feel we're letting them off the hook in some way. And it's kind of relates to what Valerie was saying, is would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? Because we think that being right, we somehow defeated our enemy, or gotten back at our enemy. And we, I'm not trying to, I have to keep in mind that I'm not trying to address my anger in this way for someone else. I'm doing it for myself. Anger makes me suffer, in numerous ways. But when I'm angry, I don't enjoy things. When I'm angry, I don't listen to people. And it causes a lot of problems for me. So, but there is also this remnant that letting go of this anger is going to let the other person off the hook. That is so-called justifiable anger, or something like that. Anyway, thanks everybody. Yeah.
And you don't let another person off the hook? Is that the problem?
Right, that I feel like if I'm letting, it's like forgiveness. That, if I forgive them, then I'm not, then losing the battle somehow. That I'm letting them off the hook. The anger is a way of getting back at them for whatever I perceive that they did to me or they're doing to me. Right. So I know there's that resistance to let go of the anger, and I know it's not, it's
I can relate.
really delusional.
Yeah.
I'm deluded, and
It's
but I
it's
think it's a
cool that
difficult thing. I find that difficulty for myself, and I find it a challenge in my work with people too. You tell people to let go of their anger. What do you mean? I have every right to be angry, and it's.
yeah, it's cool that you can see the delusional part of it because,
Yeah, it's
you know,
totally
everybody is so much more amenable, right? When we come at them angry, you know, in terms of being effective, you know, and at the same time, being aware of how that, if I don't want to let go of that, you know, I want to be able to protect myself, to make sure they don't do this again.
May I say something, or should I wait till tomorrow, John? Huh?
Say something, Peter.
I was saying if it's okay to say something, or would you prefer I wait till tomorrow?
No, say something.
Okay. Well, if I understand correctly, I believe I understood that actually the aggression is an inspiration to compassion. Because if there was not, you know, or well, it's hard to say no, that not if there was not aggression, but the problems with aggression and so on become workable through the instigation or appearance or whatever you would say of the aggression. Am I correct?
What?
Am I correct that the existence of aggression can be or is an inspiration to develop compassion? A means by which, in terms of how we relate to it properly, as we've spoken of. Am I not making sense? I'm feeling it that way.
It certainly can be.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't mean singularly, but I'm taking it that way. And I'm feeling, oh my gosh, considering the way that I have been relating to aggression, you know, which has not, it's like, it's saying that the best thing is your enemy, like what you, Philip, was saying, basically. What I put you to say. It's the enemy is your inspiration. Is that what you were saying, Philip?
Yeah, what you're saying, I think that's what Tom Glenn is all about.
Yeah.
Or to get back to Dan, it's all point of view, right? It's only Dan, and you use these words as you were talking, it's only Dan who thinks he is right. The other person, that person thinks he is right. So who's right? Well, you both, neither of you are. It's all ego.
Yeah. But it's a fantastic option. It excites me. I won't go into how I've been treating aggression, but comparatively, relatively speaking, this is remarkable. This is a tremendous inspiration for me and is giving me a means which is extremely precious and extraordinary. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. You know, and you were so elegant and so specific. I'm so impressed, and I'm so really, really grateful and impressive by your presentation. It's clear as anything I could imagine. I thank you for that.
Thank you, Peter. And, you know, I'm presenting our teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche. I stay so close to the text that, you know, I so appreciate being able to spend time with it.
Fantastic. I hope I'm right.
Just quickly, right before meditation, Trip was talking about his voyage he went on recently, and he said, "A calm sea never makes an expert sailor."
Yeah, very much the same thing. Very much the same thing. I'm delighted.
That was Robin, just to be clear. I mean, that was Val. Val said it. But it's true.
Yeah.
So we
Sorry
all
about
have to
this.
we all
When,
have to go out and find our Bengali tea boy now.
I see.
Oh,
yeah,
Hands
Oh,
up.
what?
Excuse me, Barry. Jane has been having her hand up here.
I want to go out and find more enemies.
You're muted.
Mm. Yeah, I want to echo the thank yous to Laura, John, and Philip, everyone who spoke.
You're muted again, Jane.
To unmute. Okay, I want to look at another element and the gradations of aggression, and when we're talking about rage, and from specifically the rage of a child, a helpless child who has been physically, emotionally abused by either a parent or a loved one or an adult that is in charge of their care, and that results in an unloved adult who has only experienced pain and suffering, physical, emotional. I think that's a different category of becoming, through Tonglen, through patience, through compassionate practice, forgiveness, loving kindness, a different requirement to move on in the path. And I think that needs the presence of a loving adult, of a teacher, of a friend, of a relationship, or many, many that emphasize that the person, the child who's now an aggressive, raging, miserable, suffering adult can be healed. So I wanted to bring that out because that's a little bit further than I think what we're talking about as adults in this Zoom room.
yeah, thank you. I don't think this is a solitary path. I think you're absolutely right that
That's the point, Laura. Yes.
yeah, that we need each other. We need somebody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, John. Hi.
Hi. Oh, who's saying hi?
Judy.
Judy, hi. And then Ed Papantonio.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Judy.
I'm trying to put my finger on why it seemed to me to be a revelation that wanting things to be otherwise, for me, leads to aggression. Those two things becoming linked for me in this talk was something of a revelation. I mean, I have my tea boy, my husband, oh boy, among our friends in California where we are now, it has been a standing joke that he is Atisha's tea boy. And he has problems hearing, and he either doesn't wear his hearing aids or he has them not correctly adjusted, and I have to keep repeating myself, and it makes me angry. And there it is. I'm wishing things were other than what they are. Making that linkage just really was like a relief. It was great. And thank you both so much for.
Can you say more about why it was a relief? I think that would be very helpful.
Well, that's what I'm trying to put my finger on. because when it happens, I'm not, I go right into justifying myself. I'm right. He's wrong for not handling the hearing aids or wearing them or whatever. And it's the connection between consciously realizing that things that I'm wishing things were other than what they are. It's somebody having a problem, a physical problem that isn't being handled right, and it isn't intended most of the time to infuriate me, and yet not putting those two things together leads you just into the maze again, or leads me into the whole cycle of frustration, anger. He's wrong, I'm right. Why does it keep repeating? Instead of just realizing that I'm wishing things were different than what they are and trying my damnedest to make it different by yelling at him or refusing to repeat or, etc. So I don't know why it should be such a relief to put those two together, actually, but it is.
You know, what comes to my mind is two things. One, that it's really a good example of how you have the first arrow, that it's unpleasant to have to keep repeating yourself. But then the second arrow is the resentment.
Yeah. Yeah.
The resentment that you're in this situation that you have to keep repeating.
And then that I'm right and he's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole
and you're off and running. Yeah.
And off to the races.
Yeah. He talks in this chapter about when we actually I think, I don't know what his term was, but when we look back on our aggression, with an awareness, there's actually like a sense of spaciousness around that.
Maybe that's what I'm feeling.
Well, thank you for that example. That's great.
All through this chapter, I'm thinking of a person I regard as my enemy. And he described him in the lines. He says, he's describing my enemy. Aggression may show up in people's cowardly little smiles in the midst of arguments. And that's what this person does, They mask their aggression with me, their aggression towards me, with these cowardly little smiles, these false smiles. And it infuriates me. And so this is my opportunity. This is my T-boy. I keep thinking of my T-boy when I read this, and how, and I think that the first step for me is simply not going into action emotionally, like I'm going to hate this person, but instead see it. At least if I can do that, there's some space. There's a moment of not going into that painful, aggressive action on my part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think, if each of us could find our T-boys.
I'll invite you all up.
That one. Or two.
Ed has something.
Yeah, Ed.
This is slightly far afield from our conversation, but I think one reason that we as Americans have such a difficult time with aggression is because it is encouraged by our society. And the reason I say this is, if you look at our history, we were founded by Puritans, right? Massachusetts Bay Colony. Think of the Scarlet Letter, right? The Scarlet Letter that Hester Prynne had to wear for her whole life, okay? Never let go. The idea of, if someone is wrong, that person must pay for it forever, for her whole life. And we've kind of inherited that in our psyche. Fast forward to the gun culture, where you have a right to constantly be aggressive, even if it's not called for, right? You have a right to carry a weapon, which in any way, shape, or form has got to be considered an aggressive gesture.
Yeah.
Any place you want. So what we and the reason I'm saying it is because I think this is, if you will, a unique burden that our culture imposes on us, and makes it all the more requires more determination to cut through the social support we have for ego manifestation, if you will.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Great point.
Thank you. Juicy topic. Of course, I know that many of you don't have aggression and feel anger or irritation, so it'll be harder for you. Those of you, unlike the rest of us neurotic people.
It's interesting to be observant of the times that I'm aggressive toward myself. You know, he talks about guilt being a form of aggression. Trip, yeah.
Yeah, and thank you, Laura, and everybody for your comments. I think, over the past 10 days or so, I've had a lot of time to think and reflect. And I think what strikes me just listening now in particular is, and Dan had mentioned it earlier, but the idea of just the pure torture and suffering that we cause ourselves with aggression. And there are moments, especially where, in being able to see it and to being able to make a conscious choice that I would rather not torture myself, and actually seeking freedom from the torture of my own aggression, I found was somewhat motivating, and some like a little bit of a helpful tool for me. I mean, just simply to reduce my suffering, and in turn reduce the suffering that I cause other people. And then I would say it was also interesting to see, the importance of, we have our chant where, it's being patient enough to let confusion dawn as wisdom. And it just kind of occurred to me to be patient and confident enough to let aggression dawn as compassion. And it's something I'm really trying to work on, which is to be patient and ride it out. And the water analogy, I just returned from 7 days, 2 of which on the high seas, that taught me a thing or two about high seas. And I do think that having confidence and being willing to ride it out is, and I think it's akin to not resisting. It's akin to accepting the aggression as it is really the only way to deal with it, because the more you resist, the more it drags you down and into it and creates more pain for yourself and others. So yeah, I mean, I think aggression is just pure suffering, no matter how you slice it. At least that's the way I feel. Thank you.
There's a Buddhist saying, I don't know if I've got it quite right, somebody can correct me if I don't, that having aggression or hatred towards another person is wanting to do them harm and drinking molten steel in order to accomplish that.
That's very vivid, John. Thank you. I was thinking that the aggression, as Ed was talking about, coming from the ego, it's like there's a knowing how things should be, and they're not that way. There's a sense of knowing, and to just wait out and being able to tolerate not knowing is what your share is reminding me of, Trip.
I think it's worth pointing out at this time that there's a tremendous amount of physiological damage that we cause ourselves with aggression and anger. The list is endless. It's high blood pressure and heart attacks and ulcerative colitis and gastric ulcers, and it just goes on and on and on.
Since Philip said that, I'll chime in. I find coming at it that way very useful, just to decouple the sensation and the emotion and find the space just to go, ooh, it feels very tense in here. I think something upset me, and just being able, in that same wait it out, find the space for that sensation to be there till the sensation passes and maybe the emotion goes with it. But somehow I find it easier approaching it from the physical side and letting the emotional stuff sort of have its space before I get there.
Mark Eskenazi has a hand up.
I had a hand up. It's after 9 o'clock. Anyway, I was just, what I like to do, my initial anger is problematic, and I always try to empathize with the person I'm arguing with. Well, I tried, I don't always, but like, things that are difficult, for me, it's pretty easy, I feel, to kind of get their perspective. I don't know if that's something everybody just has a strong opinion on, their own self-opinion, or if they're able to empathize with others, but I've always felt it was easy for me to get that. And then I get angry at myself for having gotten angry when there obviously was another point of view. Well, all right, I'll give an example, like my mom, she's older, there are issues we have from time to time, and I don't want to give any specifics, but, I get angry and I'm like, this isn't easy for her. It's as simple as that. And then I get angry at myself. And then I get angry at myself, but then I try to be more in the moment. And that helps me greatly. It relieves my anxiety and my stress. Ultimately, it becomes a story. And I also, I try to follow up with better, trying to be a little less angry at things. But the point is, a lot of it becomes a story. And I think we do need to remember that, and that other people have other points of view. We're so busy talking about the self and the I, and I'm angry. I mean, we're all a little connected there, and maybe a little less I and a little more you, or none of the above. I don't know. Anyway, that's it.
That's interesting, Mark. It's like empathy is like a skillful means. Like you can't be empathetic and angry in the exact same moment, right?
I guess I don't know. I know that, yeah, if I can try to get someone else's perspective, yeah, it drops away. But then it changes again. Then I get angry at myself for not having, for maybe gotten argued and reacted when I could have held back. So, then the next step for me is, trying to be more in the moment at that point.
And and then you go to the moment and things become more spacious.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's really helpful for me. If from the perspective of trying to be less. I think it is, and I think I'm less angry in the moment. I think that's what I want to avoid more, is those type of arguments. Anyway, I'm going on too much.
Sorry. I think Ellen has a point.
I just wanted to say, I think for me, if I use the word compassion rather than empathy, so there's compassion for the other person and compassion for myself or yourself, that seems to put it in a little different way that is more accessible. Well, I think compassion is a really good word.
Okay, thank you.
Well, on that note, we're right close to the end here. So we have a discussion group tomorrow. Everybody's invited right after meditation. And so I think we should, do you think, Maura? Can we close now? Okay. And I'm going to put the chant up on the screen. And Sarah, you will do the honors.
By this merit may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, John.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you,
John.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Night.
Great.
Wonderful.
Uh-oh.
Terrific. Terrific. Good night.
Good night, everybody.